So this is April
25th.
25th, 2014. This is Shirley Ann Yoshikawa. Just gonna do a little mini interview. So first, so Maxim is almost 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any words of advice for Maxim?
Oh.
So imagine Maxim is watching this in 20 years.
Oh. Well, listen to your dad and your mom, because they're wiser than you know. They've gone through the same thing that you're going through. And whatever they tell you will be good advice. But I know you're going to be a really good young man. You'll be 23 in 20 years in June. So you'll be as good as your dad and your mommy and your Aunt Nicole. That's going to be really great. But Maxim, you're your own person, and I know you're going to be real happy and excited about your future.
Okay. Let's see. Do you want to? You want to say anything else? You just want to say this is Grandma, I love you, or something?
Yeah. Hi, Maxim. This is Grandma. We love you so, so much. We're so happy to have you, Maxim.
Okay. So, you want to tell me? Just talk about growing up. So, where were you born?
Richmond, Indiana.
And tell us about that.
Oh, it was nice. It was a small town. We lived above a grocery store and a drugstore. It was real nice. And when I would go to the grocery store, Mr. Workman used to say, "Shirley, are you busy today?" I was about 8, almost 9, 8.5. And I'd say, "No, I have some time." And he'd say, "Well, I'll give you 35 cents to deliver this milk and bread to Randolph Street. It was a block, if you ask your mom." And I'd say, "Sure." And because for 35 cents you could go to the movie and get popcorn.
And who was in the house? And did you guys move around a lot? And where did you move to?
We were born there. We were born at Reed Memorial Hospital, and it was my mom and dad and Uncle Bobby and my brother Bob and my sister Patty. And then Bill, Wayne, and Clay, they were already married. And Bill had Billy Joe, and Wayne had Debbie, and Clay had Sandy when my mom passed away. So my mom had 4 grandchildren, but she was only 44 when she passed away. She had her firstborn at 18 and her lastborn at 38, 20 years difference. Aunt Patty was her, Uncle Clay was her firstborn. She had him when she was 18, 1928, because she was born in 1910. And then Aunt Patty, she had 1938. And she was 38, but she passed away in 54.
So, where did your mom and dad meet?
They met because Dad was at a wrestling match, and one of she was embarrassed to see him because he had trunks on for wrestling. And then one of her brothers took her to see him, and he liked her. He had never been married before, and she was a widow because her husband died when she was 28
What did he die from?
of tuberculosis.
And where was the wrestling match at?
It was in a little Rockcastle County.
Where's that? In Indiana?
No, Kentucky. It was about. My mom lived in Berea, and she had a hard time because she had 3 boys when her husband passed away.
She had Bill, Wayne, and Clay.
They were like. They were about 12.
They were like almost teenagers.
No, not even that. They were like, the oldest Clay was, 28.
Oh. Wait, so she went to. How did she even go to the wrestling match?
Well, she was still living at my grandma and grandpa's farm. She lived with them, and she took in washing and ironing to make extra money.
Okay.
And then her brothers were going. It was it wasn't just wrestling. They used to have fairs,
Okay.
and they had a little wrestling match.
Okay.
And Dad was in it. And then
But he was living in Richmond.
he must have been living around there, Berea,
Okay.
and for a time. And he met Mom, and he really liked her.
Did he travel around doing wrestling shows?
I don't know. But he was never been married, and he was 33.
But like, did he do this wrestling all the time?
No.
Just this point?
Just
couple
about
times?
2 or 3 times. And then when she went to see him the second time, I think, with her brothers, because it was like a fair, carnival fair, and she was embarrassed because he had the trunks on.
Mhm.
They were probably longer back then, but she was still a little embarrassed because they didn't show a lot of skin then. And he said he fell in love with her right away.
And then when?
And then they got married, and she had the 3 boys, Bill, Wayne, and Clay.
They got married and moved to Richmond?
They got married, and then Dad they bought a little house outside of Berea, and Dad got because it was the Depression, no one had much food. They had a big garden, and he got a milk cow. So that was really good, because they could have butter and milk and cottage cheese. They used to make it a homemade cottage cheese.
And then?
And then Dad said, well, they were doing pretty good there, but it wasn't real good. But he said, I guess he knew about Richmond, Indiana. He said, let's move to Richmond. And so Bill, Wayne, and Clay, they had never been anywhere but on a farm in Berea. They had never, Richmond's a small Midwestern town.
But it was like almost like a city.
Yeah, like a city to them, because we lived in an apartment there above the drugstore and the grocery store. And my dad, then after, Bill told me that they thought it was great. They could go to the movie, walk to the movie. And then my dad bought a Phillips 66 gas station with his first cousin, Ern Pierce. But that was when they paid for gas with ration stamps. So Uncle Bill said you couldn't make much money. But he learned how to drive because my dad would say that's when they changed the oil. They used to have oil pit, and you drive up over the pit, and opened, and the oil would go down there, and they had a drain for it.
Mm.
And then they would change people's oil. And he would tell Uncle Bill, Billy, go move the car. Can you move that car? He taught him how to do it up over the oil pit.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill would do it, and he said that's how he learned to drive.
And then, so, let's see, and then Uncle Bobby was the first one born.
Well, and then my mom and dad, their firstborn, they had Bill. She had Bill, Wayne, and Clay, and Wayne was only like 2 when his dad died. He was about 4 when Mom and Dad got married,
Mm-hmm.
and Billy was 7, and Clay might have been 10. So they were still little kids. And then they had their firstborn, his name was Marvin. Dad named all of us. He named him Marvin Walker. He had real blonde curly hair and big blue eyes. He looked like my dad. And then he got into some kerosene. My mom had asked her sister to watch him for a minute, and there was this kerosene that they used to keep in a Coke bottle by the stove to start the fire with, and they said that, but Dad said Marvin was real smart. His name was Marvin Walker. I always thought that was a neat name. That was his middle name, Walker. That's like the president, George Walker Bush. And anyway, that's what his name was, Marvin Walker Johnson. And he drank the coal. He took a sip of it, and it got into his lungs. And that was in 1941 or 2. And they couldn't save him. And he died. He was 2. But Dad could never get over him doing that because my mom had a cellar and she canned a lot of things. He loved apple butter. And they would take him, Dad would take him to the cellar and say, he'd say he'd like apple butter. He was just talking. And Dad would say, well, if you can pick it out, you can have it. And he could always pick it out, even though the other cans would look like dark too. Dad could never get over him picking up that Coke and taking, a sip of it. It was real hard on my dad and Mom, and Dad talked about him all his life. He didn't make him real sad like to us. We just felt like we sort of knew him. But he talked about him. He just said that was the hardest thing you could ever go through, is to lose a kid. And then they had Marvin, and then he passed away when he was 2. And then they had Uncle Bobby in 1943. And Bobby looked just like Marvin. He had blonde curly hair. And my dad went and got his hair cut because my mom didn't want to get the girls cut off. But Dad took him to the grocery store and he said, that's a pretty little girl you got there.
Mm-hmm.
So Dad took him to the barber shop and got him his hair cut. And then Uncle Bobby went everywhere with Dad. And they went to the movie almost every Friday night. And sometimes they'd sneak off from me and Patty. And sometimes I would cry, because I cried a lot to get my way when I was a kid. And I said, well, we want to go to a movie too. It'd be a Western. But Dad would take us sometime. He'd take us about every, we had to walk across the bridge to get there. And he said, they were building it, and it was all wood. It was really real scary. But I always felt protected by my dad. Cause
That was the bridge to where?
Downtown, in Richmond to downtown. Mm-hmm. They built a new one, and in the meantime, it was right a quarter of a block from our house where it started. It was wood. They had all wood planks to go across. So you had to watch it when you walked over because there could be a little space. I always thought. But and when I used to go to the movies and I was a little girl and Randolph Scott came on the screen, I always thought my dad looked like Randolph Scott. And I asked Marvin, your dad, Chad. And he said, yeah, your dad did look like Randall.
So then, so there was 6 kids,
Well, there was 3 my mom had.
but and then 3 of you guys.
Uh-huh. No, and then she had 4 of us.
Well, 4 of you.
Uh-huh, but one
But
passed away.
Marvin passed away.
Mhm.
And
So-
then, so you were going to, which school were you going to?
Okay. Well, Uncle Bobby was born in 43 and I was born in 47.
Mm-hmm.
And Aunt Patty was the last one. She was born in 47. Uncle Bobby was born in 43. I was born in 44. Aunt Patty was born in 47. And then my mom died at 1954. Aunt Patty was about 6.5. She was ready to turn 7 then.
And you were 10.
Right before I was 10.
Right.
A week before.
What elementary school were you going to at the time?
Warner.
Warner.
Well, no, Baxter then. Baxter, because when we went back to Richmond, Indiana, I told Fred, I said, if you go up a couple blocks, I think you'll run into my school. And it was there. It's about a block and a half.
And then, what did your mom die of?
Heart attack
Heart attack
and asthma.
and asthma. And then, let's see, and then what high school did you go to?
Okay, well, so then 1954, Mom died. And so then about 55, a year later, we bought a house. My dad always wanted to build my mama home from the apartment, but she didn't want to move because she knew all her neighbors. And he bought a lot out there in Indiana, a building lot. And it was on 35. It was pretty nice. They were building new homes out there. But anyway, after Mom died, then they sold Grandma and Grandpa's farm, and because Mom was gone, they gave Dad, they split up the money with Bill, Wayne, and Clay, and me, and Bob, and Pat. What would have been Mom's share, which I don't think it was more than a couple $100 each. But Dad used it as a down payment on a house on Northwest 7th Street. We lived
What was
half
it,
a
life
block from the
insurance money?
school.
Life insurance money?
No, my mom and dad's farm. When my grandpa and grandma's.
Oh, okay.
My grandfather had passed away and my grandmother was living there on the farm. But
After your mom died?
but then they decided to sell it. It was Uncle Gus and Uncle Frank and Uncle Toy. Dad didn't think they should have sold it because her Uncle Kitch had lived there on the farm since he had been married. He had about 7 kids. But anyway, so Dad, I didn't find out till recently, but my sister-in-law told me that that's how Dad got the down payment for the house.
And who was your grandma and grandpa that sold the farm? What were their names?
Melissa Thacker. Seals, her maiden name, her first name was Melissa.
Uh-huh.
Her maiden name was Seals, Seals,
Uh-huh.
and her last name. Then my grandfather's name was George Thacker. Thacker.
And George's siblings were,
Well, I think
what
he had
were their names?
well, now I remember,
Oh, there's
I don't
Gus.
remember his siblings, but he had a couple siblings and they
Okay.
fought in the,
Well, how was he related to Uncle Gus?
that's my mother's brother.
Oh, okay.
My mother
So your
had,
mother's siblings are who?
so Uncle Gus, my mother had, I'll tell you her brothers. Uncle Gus, he had like 12 kids, but 2 died at childbirth. So he raised 10. And then, well, so that's 10 first cousins in Uncle Gus's family. 2 boys and 8 girls. And then Aunt Bessie had her husband. That was my mother's sister. She lived to be 97. And she was able to live by herself, almost 97, about 96. And she was able to live by herself in Richmond, Indiana. A little house. She had a garden till she was 95. And then she had 10 kids. She had,
But name your moms. Who are your mom's brothers and sisters?
that's what I'm telling you.
Oh,
Aunt Bessie had, that's her sister. She had 2 sisters. One of them was Aunt Bessie.
well, go over all the siblings first of your
Oh.
mom. So there's Gus, Bessie,
Bessie.
Toy.
Toy had 6 kids.
Keep going.
Frank.
Frank.
6 kids. No, Uncle Toy had 7 kids. Uncle Frank. 7. And then that was my mother's brother. Uncle Toy, Uncle Gus. Aunt Bessie had 10. I think 6 girls and 4 boys. And Aunt Mattie had seven. That was my mom's sister. She lived to be 94.
So they all lived pretty long, right?
And Uncle Gus, 87, and Uncle Frank, 95. And
So then, going back to when your mom passed away, then your dad ended up buying a building,
a home
a
house
house,
on Northwest 7th Street in Richmond,
and that's
Indiana.
still in Richmond.
It was real close to the school, half a block, Warner School. We went there, that was elementary.
Okay, and then you guys were living there, and then you were kind of the person in charge. You were cooking and cleaning.
Well, yeah. Well, we had a housekeeper first. We had a cook and a housekeeper. Well,
How'd you guys afford that?
I don't know. My dad people just did that for you. But she wasn't a great cook, but I don't remember what. She just like straightened up or told us, gave us little chores. Well, and that was till I was about. When my dad worked in Dayton for about 6 months, he had to be at, it was called Inland still, I think it's still there,
Dayton.
Ohio.
So you
It
drove
was about
from
half
Richmond
hour.
to Dayton.
So he would get me and Uncle Bobby, that's after Mom died, and Aunt Patty up and fix us biscuits and gravy and sausage and bacon. And then he would go to, he would let us eat, because he wanted us to have breakfast. And then we'd get up early to eat, 3:30 in the morning, and then we'd eat. And then he'd have to leave about 4, because he got to Dayton. He got there when they weren't even getting up when he got there to meet the other guys that worked there. And he set the alarm clock for us so we would know what time to get up to get to school.
And where did he work at? What was it called?
Inland still.
Inland still.
After my mom died. Before that, he worked for Crosley It was in Richmond, Indiana.
Okay.
It was Crosley used to be. That's what Crosley Field's named after.
Mm-hmm.
Crosley radios. They made refrigerators. It was in Richmond, Indiana company. Crosley. He worked as a night watchman there.
Why did he switch?
Well, because of the Depression, and he always had to work weekends to make extra money. My mom, he always worked weekends.
What year was this about? This is like
1955.
55.
It was, everybody was having sort of a hard time. 55, 56.
Okay, and then let's see. So then, at some point, you start going to high school at.
Well, when we were
What was the name of the high school that you went to?
Test Junior High.
Test.
Well, first I went to Lexington Junior High because we moved to Lexington because it was hard to get a job in Richmond.
Okay, you moved to Lexington, Kentucky.
Kentucky. And we went to Lexington Junior. We moved there with Wayne and Naomi and Debbie. We shared an apartment together, all of us. And then we went to Lexington Junior High School.
Now, how old was Wayne?
Oh, he was married. He was about 20. I think when Mom died, he was born in 34.
Oh, so he was already 20 something.
At 20 years old.
And who was Naomi and
I was his wife.
and Debbie?
Debbie was his daughter, firstborn.
Okay.
But
So
they
you
didn't
guys
have
all-
Tammy yet.
You all lived together?
Mm-hmm.
So that was your dad, you, Bobby, and Patty, and Wayne, and Clay.
Naomi, and Debbie. But before that, I forgot.
And what about the other two boys, Clay?
Yeah, okay. Before that, before we moved to Lexington, I forgot about this. Dad was trying to take care of us some work. We all rented a house on Northwest, it's still a pretty nice area, Northwest 17th Street. And it was a 2-story home, and Dad and Clay rented it together, and Clay and Jean and Sandy and Jean's sister Geraldine and her sister Luella lived there. And me and Uncle Bobby and Aunt Patty and Dad and Clay and Jean. We all lived in that house for about a year.
Where was that at?
Northwest 17th Street in
Okay.
Richmond, Indiana.
So you guys went down to Lexington for like a year,
Yeah,
and then you went back to Richmond?
no. And then we went to Lexington Junior High.
I mean, but which cities were you living in?
Okay, then Lexington, Kentucky. And then I went to Henry Clay High School.
Mm-hmm. In
Okay.
Lexington?
Yeah, and it was one of the top 10 high schools in the whole country. And I went with, and my cooking class was, at my table was Whitney Vanderbilt, relation to the Vanderbilts.
Mm-hmm.
Really rich girls but they were real nice. And then another girl, her father owned Lowenthal Furs. Used to be a real big fur company that sold Lowenthal. That's a Jewish name. And then Barry Lowenthal sat at my table. And my brother was a high school baseball and football player. He was good looking, but he was popular because if you played sports, you were popular. And they'd say, "Is Bobby Johnson your brother?"
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Yeah," and they said, "Well, he's cute."
And
So,
how long were you guys in Lexington?
about, let me see, 2.5 years. And when Henry Clay High School, they had co-op there. That's how advanced they were. When I was in, and they had typing the first year as a freshman, the first year typing, and the second year if you wanted it as a senior. But they had co-op, and you could, maybe if you were interested in marketing, you could find a store that you were interested in, or whatever your interest was. Maybe a hospital, you wanted to work in a hospital, you could get a job there, and that would count as credits toward your education. Well, okay, so then Lexington was a nice little town that's real big now. We lived there for about a year and a half, year and 3/4 probably. And then we moved to, then Dad was doing different jobs, and so he found Boone County, Florence, Kentucky. We lived close to there. He rented a farm, and he raised the tobacco for him, and they paid him. He didn't own the farm there. And it had 2 lakes, though, great big lakes. And everybody liked to go fishing in the lake. It was a real pretty farm, 93 acres.
That's in Boone County,
Mhm.
Kentucky?
Yeah, it would be worth millions now. I mean, maybe even more than millions. Because they told me that they're building all these new homes on that road.
And you guys moved there, and
I went to Boone County High School.
your dad bought a place?
No, he didn't buy that place, he rented it.
Oh, okay. And then
It was only 3 farms on the whole road.
and then he was raising tobacco, like
For
a,
and for the share, you know.
like a sharecropper.
Yeah, and he got half the money. And so then Em and Bob decided they wanted a farm, so we raised a lot of tobacco, 8 acres, and we never had any hired help. It was Dad and Bob and me and Patty. We worked hard. 8 acres of tobacco keeps you pretty busy.
And then you guys lived there in Boone County for how long?
Well, all the way through high school. I graduated from Boone County High School. And then I got a job. I got a job at Fifth Third. Because I took all business classes. Yeah, when I took my aptitude test for Fifth Third, I was the last one called in. I wanted that job a lot, but I was last, and I thought, oh, Shirley, you didn't get the job. They must have done a lot better than you on your aptitude and all that. But then when the personnel guy called me in, he said, well, I saved the best for last. You know, and they said, Shirley, you know, you just took that test with 18 college freshmen. They are freshmen in college. And he said, you did better than any of them. He said, now your vocabulary is still leaves a little bit to be desired. You're like all the other young people, but it was a little better than most of them. We had to take spelling and some English and math and everything. But anyway, so he said, you're hired. I was real happy.
And how did you guys find your way to Vivi? Did you
Well,
ever get there?
Then Dad, after I was already working at Fifth Third, then Dad was doing work. He went doing work, and if you go straight down 42, past Ghent, Kentucky, and all that, you can go over Markland Dam. I guess they would go different places looking for work. They would cut trees, move people's junk, just anything to make extra money.
Mm-hmm.
And And then we raised tobacco pretty far down there on that 42, about 3 or 4 miles. Well, and then Dad was working and he found this Vivi, small town, and the land was pretty cheap there. And then he found a farm he could buy that was pretty reasonable. And so that's why he raised so much tobacco, to get the down payment for the farm. And that was 73 acres.
In Vivi?
Mhm.
And what, 73 acres in Vivi?
Mhm.
And what year?
19, probably about 1965.
65. So then your dad and Patty and
Uncle
Bobby moved to Vivi.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't move with
And
him.
you stayed in Boone County
Mhm.
working at Fifth Third.
Mm-hmm.
And how did he manage 73 acres? Like, what was he planning?
Well, he raised tobacco down there too, his own that was on the ground,
Mhm.
and he had a dairy cows. And they had it hooked up like a milker. First, when they first got it, they did the milking by hand, but then they had milkers installed. And Dad was always, Bill Wayne Clay said that Dad taught them how to make a living if there weren't any jobs around. Like Wayne would sell Christmas trees. He would go get Christmas trees and sell a load of Christmas trees at Christmas to make extra money. And my dad would always sell fruit. He would go to Indianapolis in the summer at a fruit farmer's market and get watermelons and cantaloupes and green beans and corn and tomatoes. And he would bring them back, and we would go to Uncle Gus's because he had like 10 kids.